Hello. Yeah. Morning, friends. We are going to start our first session, the session on current status and future trends in global navigation satellite systems. I am very happy and grateful that the honorable ministers are here for this session, and thank you very much, ministers. That will make this session much more exciting. The session will be chaired by my good friend Brad Carter and reporter Shreya Sarkar, sorry, please.
Okay, thank you, Sushil. So my name is Brett Carter from the RMIT Space Research Centre in Melbourne, Australia, and as Sushil said, I'm chairing the session. First up, we've got Mr. Jeffrey Rybak, who, oh, where did it go? Here we go. Okay, who works at the US Department of State in the Office of Space and Advanced Technology, where he supports US policy in ensuring compatibility and interoperability with the GPS. In his capacity, Mr. Rybak supports the activities of the International Committee on GNSS and other international outreach. Prior to this position, he worked for the US Federal Aviation Administration, where he worked on international aviation activities and the expansion of the wide area augmentation system. Please welcome Mr. Rybak.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and appreciate, I'd like to just say thanks to our hosts here in Fiji for putting this together. I've participated in a number of these events, and I'm really looking forward to another successful workshop. So I'm just going to provide you with a quick update on the U.S. GPS civil service and our international GNSS activities. So I'll start by talking about our policy and service provision, and then follow that with a constellation status and modernization update, and then international cooperation activities. So quickly, our policy is to maintain leadership in the service provision and use of GNSS. We provide civil GPS services free of direct user charges. We make it available on a continuous worldwide basis. We continue to maintain our constellation consistent with published performance standards and international specifications. And we also, our policy allows for foreign PNT services to be used to augment and strengthen the resiliency of GPS. So we encourage global compatibility and interoperability with GPS. We also promote transparency in the civil service provision, and we strive to enable market access to industry and support international activities to detect and mitigate interference. So the GPS signal in space performance, this shows basically how GPS has done over the last couple of years. As you can see, our best week ever, this is the user range error in centimeters, occurred last year, late last year. And also our best day occurred in 2018, and our worst day also occurred in August of last year. So you can see the range of errors here for the GPS. And then we had our best week ever back in 2016. So we, in an effort to be as transparent as possible about the performance of GPS, we've put together these performance reports. So you can actually go to our website, which is on the left here, and you can download these reports and get an in-depth look at how we're actually doing as far as our performance. And so you can see the chart is just sort of a summary of how we've done over the last 5 years or so, and which areas that we've met our standard and which areas we've been lacking. As you can see, we had a couple of years where we had I had one issue related to status and problem reporting, but that's since been corrected in 2018. So, and again, in these reports, it's a very detailed report, so it doesn't just say we met this, our standard, but it actually goes into detail about how we did that. So if you're interested, this is really good information. Okay, now going into the constellation and the status of our modernization efforts. Currently, we have 36 satellites, 30 are set healthy. Our baseline constellation is 24 satellites. So these are our family of satellites. You can see we have 4 different types of satellites operating today, starting with our Block 2A satellites that were launched between 1990 and 1997. So we actually have one of these satellites that's over 25 years old in operation. We give a lot of credit to our operators out in Colorado Springs who have done a great job of managing these satellites and ensuring that they last for as long as possible, and also allows us to keep as many satellites in operational as well without having to continuously replace them. So, and then we have 11 of the Block 2R satellites that were launched between 1997 and 2004. And then we have 7 Block 2R modernized satellites, which added the second Civil Navigation Service, L2C. And then finally, our latest block of satellites, the Block 2F satellites that were launched between 2010 and 2016, which added the third Civil Navigation signal, L5. So all of these blocks are backward compatible, so they include all of the signals from the previous generation plus the new capabilities. So now we are moving on to GPS-3, which is the newest block of GPS satellites. And this will add the 4th civil signal, L1C. And it will also have 3 improved rubidium atomic clocks, better user range errors, increased availability and integrity, and a longer design life. So these satellites are actually designed to last 15 years, which is double the length of the 2R and the 2RM satellites. And we're very proud to have launched our first GPS-3 satellite successfully on the 23rd of December last year. And it's currently going its on-orbit checkout in preparation for being operational. So in addition to having a strong strong satellite constellation, it's equally important to have a good ground infrastructure to be able to operate those satellites. So we're currently using the Operational Control Segment, or OCS. So we're making some improvements to ensure cybersecurity is strong, and some other things as well. And then we're also at the same time working on an upgrade to our ground segment, the Next Generation Operational Control System, or OCX. So we've broken that down into different blocks, which will be implemented over a period of time. The current status is that this will support the GPS-3 launch from last year, and then we're also preparing to support the second launch later this year. The OCX will have enhanced command and control capability and a modernized agile architecture. So our modernized GPS civil signals, as I mentioned, we have the L2C signal, which is designed to meet commercial needs. It's been broadcasting since 2005. We currently have 19 satellites that are operational or broadcasting the L2C. Then we're also working on the third civil signal, L5, which is primarily designed for transportation safety of life requirements. It also allows for triple frequency positioning techniques. We currently have 12 of those satellites on orbit that are broadcasting. And then, as I mentioned, the L1C signal is on the newest generation of satellites. It's designed for GNSS interoperability. So as you'll hear about later, all of the other systems are either broadcasting or planning to broadcast the L1C signal. So our signal is designed to be as interoperable as possible with all of those systems. And we're continuing to broadcast the new civil navigation message, the CNAV message, on L2C and L5, which began back in 2014. So real quick on our satellite-based augmentation system, the Wide Area Augmentation System, or WAS. It's designed for aviation use, but is available to be used by many GPS users today. For aviation, it provides a localizer performance with vertical guidance, or what we call LPV 200 capability, which is comparable to an instrument landing system category 1. It provides the capability for increased availability and accuracy in position reporting, and it can be used throughout air traffic management. And it provides services for all class of aircraft in all phases of flight. So currently we're working toward a dual frequency WAS capability using L1 and L5. And so the minimum operational performance standards, or MOPS, and the SARPs are being developed, and but we still have a lot of work left to do. We're preparing for an investment decision on this, and as you can see from the chart below, once this capability is added, the availability increases quite dramatically. So we're really looking forward to this capability. Okay, on to international cooperation. So as I mentioned, our policy calls for ensuring compatibility and interoperability, and also for promoting fair competition in the global marketplace. So these objectives we primarily pursue through both bilateral and multilateral cooperation. So I'll talk a little bit about, well, this is the big picture of all the systems out there. So you can see the 4 global constellations on the left, the 3 regional constellations as well, and then a number of different satellite-based augmentation systems. We've most recently added the Korean augmentation system, CAS, as well as the Australia SBAS, and we'll continue to update this as additional systems come online. So quickly talking about our bilateral cooperation with other GNSS providers, that includes China, where we have a GNSS plenary meeting. Most recently, we held a meeting last year. We also have 3 working groups that meet as needed to discuss interoperability and compatibility issues, as well as other important issues to both countries. And also, we signed a public joint statement on civil signal compatibility and interoperability back in November of 2017. This statement was public and can be found on our website, gps.gov, if you're interested. With Europe, we have a GPS Galileo cooperation agreement from 2004. We also have a working group on next generation GPS and Galileo civil services, which meets twice a year. They're a very active working group, and quite often they will share some of the things the activities that they're working on, for instance, through the ICG or other public forums. So you may hear about this as well. And then we also have the EU waiver of FCC Part 25 rules, which is discussed under the Working Group on Trade and Civil Applications. The waiver for Galileo, you may recall or may have heard that it was became official in November of last year. And then we also have ongoing PRS access negotiations discussions going on. With Japan, we have a comprehensive dialogue, which is held typically once a year. Our last meeting was July of last year. And then we also have a civil space dialogue, which meets as needed. They met in 2017 most recently. And then we have technical working group discussions where we talk about GPS and QZSS compatibility and interoperability. And we're currently working through ITU coordination on compatibility with Japan. With India, we have a US-India joint statement that was signed in 2007. And then we have a US-India Civil Space Joint Working Group, which meets every other year. And they're slated to meet before the end of the year. So you've heard, and probably many of you are familiar with the ICG, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the ICG basically emerged out of the UN Conference on the Exploration and Peaceful Uses of Outer Space back in July 1999, and it began meeting in 2005, or was established in 2005. I think the first meeting was in 2006. And the members include GNSS providers, as well as other member states and international organizations and associations. So the 13th meeting of the ICG took place last November in Xi'an, China. We had more than 200 participants. 27 countries and organizations were represented. All 6 GNSS providers were there. We had a meeting of the Providers Forum. We heard from system providers. We had an applications and expert sessions, and as well as meetings of all 4 working groups. And then we're very proud to have accepted Australia as a member of the ICG. So just want to touch quickly on some of the important activities related to the ICG work. GNSS interference and spectrum protection has been one of the core areas of focus. That includes a number of IDM, interference detection and mitigation workshops. We've held 8 of those since 2012. And then the other aspect is an outreach effort on spectrum protection by developing educational seminars organized by ICG experts focused on the importance of protecting GNSS spectrum. And so we're very excited to have our 4th seminar held here starting tomorrow morning as part of this workshop. So it'll be 2 half-day sessions. So you'll be hearing from me as well as my colleague on that starting tomorrow, and we'll have more information about that as well as an agenda coming out shortly. And then related to interoperability and service standards, we've had a number of discussions on interoperable time. We had a timing workshop just 2 weeks ago that took place in Vienna. And also performance standards. This is something that the US has been pushing for a long time, standardizing the information that goes into performance standards. So the ICG is working on a guidelines document being developed as a template for providers to follow with regard to what parameters are included in the performance standard. And then international GNSS monitoring and assessment. We have a trial project that's been going on for about 3 or 4 years between the ICG and the IGS. And so they've been making some progress on international monitoring of GNSS. And just a couple of other things related to the ICG, the space service volume. A booklet on the interoperable GNSS space service volume was prepared and published under the ICG Working Group B. That was published last year. You can download that document on the UN-USA website. And also related to space service volume, they've been working on a number of outreach efforts focused on the benefits of an interoperable space service volume and development of space-based user equipment. We've also had some discussions in the last couple of years related to search and rescue, especially with regard to compatibility and interoperability of MEOSAR systems. And then also the precise point positioning. So the workshop has been proposed by the ICG Working Group D, and that's going to also be held as part of this conference on Thursday, so we're very excited about that. You'll be hearing a lot more about that at that time. So in summary, our policy encourages worldwide use of civil GPS services in cooperation with other GNSS providers. Compatibility, interoperability, and transparency are priorities, and we pursue this through both bilateral and multilateral dialogues. Our performance continues to exceed commitments while our modernization efforts continue. We launched our first GPS satellite last year, and we're modernizing our ground segment to meet future needs. And then the ICG, with strong US participation, continues to pursue a global navigation satellite system of systems to provide services that benefit users worldwide. So you can find more information about this talk and other things that I mentioned at our website, gps.gov. We continue to update this regularly, so it's a great resource for finding out more. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Does anyone have a brief comment or question for Jeff while I've got him up here? Go ahead, Matt.
That's a good question. I don't have an answer. We are looking into those things, but at this time, we don't have any firm plans to announce anything related to those. But I imagine perhaps in the future that will be something that will be looked at for sure. You know, right now the priority is on implementing our ground segment, so that's taking a lot of resources into that, and so. Once we get our ground segment up and continue to launch our next GPS 3 satellites, then those things may get discussed and we may have more information about that.
Any other questions? Okay, well, let's thank Jeff again, and we'll move on to the next talk. Okay, next up, fresh off the airport, I believe, we have Sergei Rybak. There you are, Sergei. Sergei is the head of office of the GLONASS P&T Center at Roskosmos State Space Corporation. Mr. Rybak is responsible for cooperation on navigation satellite systems, particularly on compatibility and interoperability between GLONASS and other GNSS, and also coordinates the Russian participation in the ICG. Please welcome Mr. Rybak.
Dear work participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as was said, my name is Sergei Rybak. I'm from GLONASS P&T Monitoring Center. Frankly speaking, it's my first visit here. I have never been in Suva. It's definitely a lovely place to visit. You know, every year, global navigation satellite systems have been playing a more and more important role in world development. At this time, GNSS are extensively used for civil purposes in most countries around the globe. The Russian government has been exerting significant effort in order to make GLONASS an on-demand system which is available to everyone. In my presentation, I'll tell you about the GLONASS system, the Russian state policy on satellite navigation, the current status of the system and plans for its modernization, as well as on the GLONASS applications and international activities. The Russian government makes a lot of efforts to implement activities aimed at development of the national P&T infrastructure, in which GLONASS is the core element. In 2007, the President of the Russian Federation signed a decree outlining the main principles of the Russian state policy on positioning, navigation, and timing. Particularly, any user or any navigation equipment that receives the open GLONASS signals will easily be able to determine its position in real time and with precision, which the system allows at any given point and at any given time. Satellite navigation equipment used in the interest of the Russian federal bodies and subordinate organization must use GLONASS. The current state activities which deal with the GLONASS are covered by the federal program for 2012-2020. Now we are preparing a new GLONASS federal program for the next decade up to 2030. The federal program pools our efforts and resources, the first to improve accuracy and integrity of navigation, The second, to ensure guaranteed positioning, navigation, and timing solution in restricted visibility of satellites, interference, and jamming conditions. And the third, to enhance application efficiency and broadening application domain. The Russian government provides constant supervision for GLONASS it maintains in further development. Due to steady growth of customer demands, further GLONASS modernization is needed. Currently, GLONASS provides service to customers on a global scale with acceptable accuracy. As for its improvement, we plan to use a new onboard system clock with enhanced performance, to introduce advanced satellite control, orbit, and clock determination technologies based on inter-satellite communication links in radio frequency and optical bands. To transition the Russian reference frame to be closely aligned with the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, ITRF, as much as possible. And last but not least, to synchronize GLONASS time scale with International Time Coordinate, UTC, more precisely. At this moment, the constellation is comprised of 24 operational MEO navigation satellites. There are 3 additional satellites in orbit. One is orbital spare. The other are in flight, test, and commissioning phases. There are also 3 geostationary satellites in the orbital constellation used as retransmitters for augmentations. 2 of them are operational. The third one is in maintenance. The augmentation ground segment uses 26 reference stations located in Russia and 11 stations abroad. There are also local and regional networks in Russia that operate more than 4,000 stations. They are operated by the Ministry of Transportation and other federal and regional authorities to provide additional navigation services. The ground control segment includes system control center, reference stations, uplink, and laser ranging stations. There are also fundamental facilities in Russia which create the national reference frame and the standard time UTCSU used by GLONASS. GLONASS satellites are launched as necessary to ensure the proper functioning of the system. For example, in 2016 we launched 2 satellites, in 2017 1, in 2018 2 again. This year we also have launched a satellite. The most interesting thing about this launch is that during the liftoff, a lightning struck the satellite but didn't damage it. You can see it at the picture, so remarkably. Several words about GLONASS interface control documents that describe general characteristics of GLONASS, types of its navigation signals, and general algorithm for processing navigation message data. GLONASS transmits 2 types of signals: FDMA, frequency division multiplexes, and CDMA. FDMA signals are traditional ones that GLONASS has been sending out from the beginning. 3 CDMA signals in L1, L2, and 3 bands are new ones. They are in testing yet. All GLONASS satellites launched in the future will transmit both FDMA and CDMA signals. The interface control documents for the 2 types of signals have been released in Russian and English at the website you can find on this slide. Augmentations have come certainly to play an important role for GNSS user worldwide. They are used to implement various types of high accuracy services from traditional RTK, real-time kinematic, to now widely spread precise point positioning technology, or so-called PPP. As we already mentioned today, in conjunction with our workshop, a seminar on PPP technology is scheduled, so you all are welcome to attend it. To meet the demands of civil aviation and other precise navigation applications, satellite-based augmentation system, or SBS in short, have been developed around the world. The Russian SBS, which we call the System of Differential Correction and Monitoring, improves the navigation accuracy up to tenths of centimeters. The ground infrastructure of the GLONASS system is also under development and modernization. The National Monitoring and Performance Assessment System is used for prediction of the GLONASS performance characteristic as well as characteristics of other GNSS. Talking about civil service, it may be considered under 4 main types. The first one is basic open service that provides navigation in absolute regime using open signals. This service is provided by the space segment. The second is a service of improved reliability and accuracy. This service allows navigation also in absolute regime using both open signals and information from augmentation systems. The third one is relative navigation service, which provides navigation in relative regime using phase measurements and a reference receiver or a reference station. And the fourth is a high precision service that uses phase measurements, PPP technology that I have already touched on. The accuracy of the mentioned above services differs accordingly. This slide gives you an idea on the current GLONASS applications hierarchy. Roskosmos State Space Corporation is responsible for almost every step of providing GLONASS-based services: satellite design and manufacturing, launches, and development of ground control complex. GLONASS is used for tracking of in-orbit operations of Russian cargo crew vehicles to the International Space Stations and other spacecrafts. About 100 airports are equipped with GLONASS ground-based augmentation system, GBAS, for approaching, landing, and liftoff. State-owned and private companies are widely engaged into operation of GLONASS-based services. This slide shows one of the key state application projects, Air GLONASS Road Emergency System. It has been in operation since 2016. Emergency calls are free of charge. Currently, all imported or domestically manufactured cars are to be equipped with Air GLONASS terminals. The system saves life of thousands of people annually. There is also great commercial potential of the data collected by its onboarding terminals. Precise information on driving style and car coordinates may be used in smart insurance, property and crime protection, traffic monitoring, toll collection, distant diagnostic, etc. Other successful GLONASS application project is Platon system. Platon is the federal toll collection system for commercial cargo trucks. It has been operating since 2015 and covers all federal highways of more 50,000 kilometers in total. Collected funds are assigned for the road infrastructure support. In conclusion, I would like to note once again that the GLONASS program is one of the priority state programs of the Russian Federation. Along with the implementation on new CDMA signals, GLONASS will continue transmitting the existing FDMA navigation signals while developing. International cooperation conducted by Russia is aimed at ensuring compatibility and interoperability between GLONASS and other GNSS. I would also like to bring your attention to the GLONASS User Information Center, which provides relevant and up-to-date information on GLONASS. That's all I have for today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sergei. Are there any questions for Sergei from the audience? Or comments? I'll just quickly add, I imagine there would have been much relief when, after the satellite that was launched and struck by lightning on the way up, that fully worked. And
so not only jamming against the jamming, and also against the lightning.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Sergei again. Thank you very much. Okay, next up, Next up we have Daniel Blonsky from the European Union. He's from the Navigation System Performance Engineering and the Directorate of Navigation of the European Space Agency. In 2001 he joined the Galileo Project Office in the ESA's Space Research and Technology Centre. Since 2007 he's been the Systems Performance Engineer responsible for coordinating all system performance activities in the Galileo Project Office, and since 2017 he's been a co-chair of the UN ICG Working Group B on enhancement of GNSS performance, new services and capabilities. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you for the introduction. Also welcome from my side to the participants of this workshop. I'm going to present you or give you a brief status update on the Galileo program, the European Global Satellite Navigation System. First of all, I would like to point out the history of the program, the major milestones. Back in 2005, we have launched our first two validation satellites, which were used to validate essential in-orbit technologies like the satellite clocks. These two satellites were called Jova A and B, and they allowed us to really validate quite a large part of the infrastructure of our system. In 2013, we have completed the launch of 4 satellites of the final configuration, together with the deployment of on-ground infrastructure to operate them. And this helped us to perform a thorough in-orbit validation of all the concepts of our system. This was back in 2013. Since 2015, and with the continuation of the deployment of the satellites and also the ground infrastructure, we were able to declare initial services of Galileo. This is initial services of the open service, so the free navigation service, the search and rescue service, the public regulated service, and also initial demonstration capabilities of the commercial service. At the moment, we are in the exploitation phase since 2016, and we are providing these initial services. We are expecting to reach the full operational capability of the Galileo system by 2020 with the deployment of 24 satellites and the completion of the ground infrastructure. Beyond that point, we are also working already on a second generation of Galileo, which will provide more advanced features and services. Just to illustrate the importance of space to Europe, you can see here on this chart the evolution of the European or the EU investment in space. Back in 2007 to 2013, in this multi-annual financial framework, 5 billion euros were spent on space. Over the next 2 multi-annual financial frameworks, there was a continuous growth to 16 billion, which are now allocated for the framework of covering activities in 2021 to 2027. A large part of it is dedicated to the European navigation systems, Galileo and EGNOS. So this investment really ensures a long-term provision, a stable provision of the Galileo services to our users. These 9.7 billion allocated to Galileo and EGNOS are mainly used to ensure the continuity of the operations and the service provision, but also to invest in new launchers and satellites to sustain the Galileo constellation of 30 satellites, and also start to develop concepts for the second generation of Galileo, which will become operational gradually as of 2030, offering higher precision, greater resilience, and new services for Galileo users. Of course, in Europe, we don't only have Galileo, there's also EGNOS, the European Global Satellite Navigation Overlay System, the European ESPAS. It's operational since October 2009. It provides safety of life services since 2011. It has a data access service available since July 2012. And just to show you the importance of it, there are more than 600 approach procedures approved using EGNOS for aircrafts landing in over 20 countries. Then I come to Galileo. Some of the key features of Galileo are it's a civil system. It's not managed by defense. It provides the mass market with dual frequency capabilities. It will provide a form of authentication of its open service. And it provides a search and rescue forward link service, but also a return link service notifying users of that they have been detected and that help is underway. So here you see the search and rescue service, which provides contribution to locate people in distress for the forward link service and confirms that help is on its way with the return link. It's a high accuracy service for commercial applications. Furthermore, Galileo will provide a contribution to safety of life services by providing vital integrity-related information for these safety of life critical applications. Where are we with Galileo? We have deployed 22 satellites. We are almost complete in our deployment. The most recent introduction has happened in February this year, with 4 additional satellites becoming operational. We provide 100% availability of horizontal accuracy below 10 meters. The 10 meters are an initial target for our initial services. We provide good geometric properties, or PDOP, which is position dilution of precision below 6, for almost every user on the Earth. The remaining few percentage missing there will be covered once the constellation is completely deployed. With this constellation, we are already able to provide the timing service 100% of the time. I was explaining before the horizontal accuracy below 10 meters. The actual performance is what you see here on this graphic, is an overlay of many reference stations we have on the Earth over a period of, I believe, 3 days. And you see that the actual measured horizontal accuracy is in the order of below 2 meters, 95%, which is a very good performance. In parallel to this, also the search and rescue service of Galileo has pushed forward the quality of these kind of services provided. With Galileo, it's possible to locate distress beacons with an accuracy of 2 kilometers within 10 minutes. Before, it was possible to locate them with an accuracy of 10 kilometers within 4 hours. So you can really perceive the advantage of the contribution of Galileo on this service, which is a very important one. Beyond that, Galileo is also becoming increasingly important to EU policies. There are a few examples on that slide. So for instance, Galileo will allow to develop more energy efficient and modern mobility solutions as part of the Energy Union policy. Galileo also is part of EU regulations, for instance, eCall, which is the emergency call system in case of roadside accidents with cars. So every new car in Europe is equipped with this system. There are other activities like digital tachograph or e-tolling, which are currently under preparation. Galileo will also play a major role in aviation, so performance-based navigation, drones, surveillance and tracking. It is used for timing of critical The signal in space error, so the measurement error, has decreased significantly during the last years to a value which is currently well below 50 centimeters and well within the targets for our initial service. Also, the UTC dissemination is very well below the target. It's in the order of 8.4 nanoseconds. Galileo offers also a time offset between GPS system time and Galileo system time, and this information is provided with an accuracy of 6.9 nanoseconds, also well within the target of our initial services. This graphic shows you the evolution of the signal in space ranging error over basically since the start of the first signals have been emitted back in 2013. So you see we started off with an accuracy in the order of 3 to 4 meters, but thanks to the continuation of the deployment and also the continuous improvements in the ground segment, we are now, since the start of the initial services, in the order of 50 centimeters. And back in March 2019, we had a very good accuracy over the whole month, averaged of about 24 centimeters. These plots show you the performance of the UTC dissemination and the Galileo GPS time offset. They are evaluated using combined Galileo GPS receivers, and which are operated at European UTC laboratories, the one in PTB, which is in Germany, and INRIM in Italy. The performances are better than expected, and some of the outliers you see in the plots have been overcome or will be overcome by upgrades in the ground segment. Just to not talk only about the system side of the performance, there's also user performance, which we are looking into in the European Space Agency in the Galileo program. Here you see a setup which is used for pedestrian tests. So we are using, in this case, the first dual frequency phone using Galileo, which was the Xiaomi Mi 8. And for this test, a number of those telephones have been used and put on a setup which allows also to get a reference position using RTK techniques. And my colleagues tried to illustrate the effect of single frequency versus multi-frequency and also versus including PPP type of corrections. So you see here, this is a single frequency solution combining Galileo and GPS satellites, and you barely can understand that these should be letters. However, when you combine dual frequency measurements and also correct them using PPP corrections, you actually can read what is what my colleagues tried to spell, which is ESA, the European Space Agency, Galileo, for the Galileo program. And this illustrates what is really achievable with new high accuracy services, which we are investigating and will become available in the in 2020. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention. If you have more questions, you can find some answers on our webpage, eceuropa.eu/Galileo. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Any questions for Daniel here and now? Yep, go ahead, Sylvia.
The open service will be authenticated with a service which is at the moment referred to as OSNMA, so Open Service Navigation Message Authentication. And this will be done with information broadcast on E1. And it's at the moment is under testing, or will be tested in a short time frame. And the commercial authentication service, the commercial part, is provided through ranging signal encryption and additional information, but this service is still under development, so to say. So there I cannot say much more, but there's two different services, and one on open service and one for commercial. Okay?
Any other questions? Well, okay, please join me in thanking Daniel again.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Zheng Xiaoxiang from China. He's the representative of China's Satellite Navigation Office. Go ahead. And he's also the head of the Chinese delegation at this particular workshop. He's been engaged in the application development and project construction of the Beidou satellite navigation system for a long time. Please join me in welcoming Zheng Xiaoxiang.
Thank you. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Zheng Xiaoxiang, the representative of China's Satellite Navigation Office. It's my great honor to be here and give the presentation of the construction and development of Beidou navigation satellite system. The presentation is divided into three parts. First, system construction. From 5 November 2017 to 19 November 2018, 19 BDS-3 satellites with 10 rockets have been successfully launched, which marks a great miracle in human aerospace history, I think. On 27 December 2018, BDS officially began to provide ICG service to the world and thus started the Beidou global era 2 years ahead of schedule. Beidou B1I and B3I signals have expanded the service areas from Asia Pacific region to the whole world and further improved accuracy and availability. When PDOB is less than or equal to 6, the service availability is better than 99% in most regions of the world. The mean value of the measured positioning accuracy in global area is as follows. Horizontal accuracy is around 306 meters. Elevation is around 6.6 meters. Velocity accuracy is about 0.05 meters per second, and time accuracy is 9.8 nanosecond. BDS, B1C, and B2A signals have a certain capacity to provide global services. When PDOP is less or equal to 6, the availability is over 87%. In addition, the mean value of the measured positioning accuracy is as follows. Horizontal accuracy is around 2.4 meters. Elevation is around 4.3 meters. Speed measurement accuracy is around 0.06 meters per second, and time service accuracy is around 19.9 nanoseconds. Yeah, 6 to 8 BDS-3 satellites will be launched in the second half of 2019, and 2 more BDS-3 satellites will be launched next year. Moreover, the construction of BDS system will be fully completed by the end of 2020. Global Short Message Communication, International Search and Rescue, PPP, is based in China and the surrounding regions, and other service abilities will be enhanced based on further improving the global navigation positioning, timing services, and regional short message communication services. And then I'm going to introduce the following services in details. Navigation positioning and timing services can continuously provide better services to global users. The signal in space accuracy will be superior to 0.5 meters, as well as the overall performance will be further improved. Regional short message communication services can reach China and the surrounding regions. The system capacity is increased by 10 times. The signal message length is 1,000 Chinese characters. The transmitting power of the user equipment is reduced to 3 watts. Global short message communication service use 14 MU satellites to provide trial service to global users with the ability of 40 Chinese characters per message. International search and rescue services serve global users in accordance with the standards of the International Maritime Organization and the Compass SAT. This system, together with other satellite navigation systems, will form the global MU search and rescue system with return links, which can greatly enhance the efficiency and the capability of search and rescue issues. Satellite-based augmentation services will serve users in China and the surrounding regions in accordance with the ICAO performance requirements. It supports two augmentation schemes, such as single frequency and dual frequency multi-constellation augmentation. PPP service use 3 GEO satellites to broadcast PPP signals and provides dynamic preset position service, accuracy at decimeter level, and state preset position service, accuracy at centimeter. It's expected that before 2035, with BDS as a core, comprehensive positioning, navigation, and timing system, which is more ubiquitous, integrated, and intelligent, will be established and perfected. It will significantly improve the capability of spatial and temporal information service. The second part, application promotion. Our complete industrial chain featuring BDS-enabled fundamental products, application terminals, application systems, and operation services have been formed. The use of BEIDou products in national core industry and key areas have been standardized, and the large-scale applications of BEIDou mass applications have been achieved. Domestic-made BDS-enabled chips, modules, and other core technology have made breaks. The performance indicators of these products are comparable with that of similar international products. A variety of BDS-enabled chips have used on a large scale with a technological level of 28 nanometers. By the end of 2018, the scales of BDS-enabled navigation chips exceeded 70 million pieces. The domestic high-precision OEM boards and antennas are exported to more than 90 countries and regions, and accounting for 30% and 19% of the domestic market, respectively. BDS-enabled products have been widely used in transportation, public security, agriculture, forest, fisheries, hydrologic monitoring, meteorological forecasting, communication, power dispatching, disaster relief, and other fields, and integrated into the national significant infrastructure. In terms of transportation, BDS has been extensively used in the monitoring and the management of priority transportation, highway infrastructure safety, and real-time high-precision positioning. By the end of December 2018, BDS has been applied on more than 6 million road operating vehicles, 30,000 postal and express delivery vehicles, around 80,000 buses in 36 cities, 3,200 island navigation facilities, and 2,900 marine navigation facilities. The world's largest dynamic monitoring system for road operating vehicles has been set up. which has efficiently improved the efficiency of road operating vehicles and the safety of the road transport. As for agriculture, forestry, and fishery, it serves more than 50,000 sets of BDS-enabled agricultural equipment. The domestic output of precision agriculture industry has increased by 5%, and the oil consumption by agriculture equipment has reduced by around 10%. BDS-enabled terminals has been installed by over 70,000 fishing boats and law enforcement vessels across China. In the field of disaster relief and reduction, a three-tier ministry, province, city platform has been built, realizing 6-level business applications and promoting over 45,000 Beidou terminals. The civil administration department at all levels now search for, manage, and monitor the information of disaster relief materials through Beidou terminals, which greatly improves management and dispatch of the disaster relief materials nationwide. In terms of mass application, the BDS-based navigation services have been widely adopted by e-commerce enterprises, manufacturers of mobile intelligent terminals, and location-based service providers. The services have extensively entered into the field of mass consumption, share economics, and people's livelihood, which are profoundly changing people's production and living. Additionally, BDS has been widely used in various fields in multiple countries, such as land rights confirmation in Indonesia and in Kuwait, Uganda, Myanmar, and etc. The second part is international cooperation. BDS is committed to open cooperation and resource sharing, and we actively carry out international exchanges and cooperation, and promotes the global satellite navigation development. The 13th ICG conference was successfully held in November 2018, following the 7th ICG conference in 2012. And President Xi Jinping sent a congratulatory letter to the conference. A manual on GNSS space service interoperability and the Xi'an initiative were released during the conference. In November 2018, the agreement between the government of the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation on cooperation in the field of the use of BDS and GLONASS for peaceful purpose was signed under the witness of premiers of both countries, which marks an important milestone in the promotion of advantage complements and the integrated development. This means that the cooperation between BDS and GLONASS has entered a new stage. In April 2019, The second China Arab States BDS Cooperation Forum was held in Tunis based on President Xi's instruction for China Arab Satellite Navigation Cooperation. Important results have been achieved in BDS entry into Arab regions. Moreover, BEDO also actively took part in the 50th anniversary of UN Conference on Outer Space and the Multi-Satellite Navigation Summit, Moscow International Satellite Forum, and many other international activities, which greatly builds its reputation, expands exchanges, and promotes win-win cooperation. In terms of international standards, the proposal for BDS-3 was approved during 3GPP-RA in plenary meeting, and the standardization of BDS-3 signals was put on the agenda. In November 2018, the BEDO Search and Rescue Load was included in the International Search and Rescue Satellite Organization's MU Search and Rescue System Development Plan and Framework documents. In January 2019, BDS-based boat-borne equipment testing standard was established by International Electrotechnical Commission and entered into the inquiry and the drafting stage. In April 2019, the first round verification of Part A of standard and the proposed solution section of ICAO BEDO Public Service standard was completed. The standardization of BEDO has reaped considerable periodic results. Looking back on the growth BEDO has experienced over the past decades and look into the new journey we were about to embark on. In the next decade, BEDO will play a more active role in serving humans and contribute wisdom and strength to the world with its stronger ability and better quality services. Please keep following and supporting BEDO. Thank you.
Very much. Any brief comments or questions from the audience? Did have one very quick question. It might be too early, but you mentioned the USP satellite launched and undergoing testing in June now. Do you remember? It was one of the earliest slides.
Yes. You can blow the.
It's okay.
Okay. Sorry.
I was just curious if we can get an insight into some early results. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's going well. Great.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Join me in thanking you again. Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the end of this particular session on GNSS. How many S's did I say? Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think it's a great example of international cooperation, and the focus on, in each one of these talks on interoperability between the two systems, I think is a really nice example of international cooperation. And with that, please join me in thanking all the speakers again. And now I hand off to Dinesh, who's chairing the next session that's starting now.
Okay, so we move to next session, and we have a first presenter, Matt Higgins, and he's going to talk on the development of precise positioning capabilities in mass market devices. So let me introduce Matt. Matt Higgins, he is a manager of geodesy and positioning in the Queensland Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. He is a former co-chair at Working Group D of ICG. He is also a former vice president and now an honorary member of the International Federation of Surveyors, FIZ. And he is a member of the US Advisory Board on Space-Based PNT and the Australian National Positioning Infrastructure Advisory Board as well. He's also president of the GNSS Association in Australia. So please, Matt. Okay.
Thank you, Dinesh. So I thought, as the first speaker, after the system providers, I'd give a bit of an overview of some of the application issues, especially for the non-experts in the audience, because this seminar is also about developing capacity for people that are not experts and more interested in the application areas. So in my talk, I'll just very quickly go through the basics of GNSS just to give some terminology, talk about bringing together some of those system developments we just heard about, and then get into a few key issues which I believe are important for users and especially users in developing countries. System-provided PPP, which is starting to happen. Issues with reference frame changing and evolution. And then mass market positioning, which is kind of the title of my talk. And then I end with a few thoughts on some of the implications. So the basics of GNSS, people are probably aware, but basically it was originally developed along military lines, but was very quickly realized that GPS should be a dual-use system. We have the accuracy of around 10 meters. The way this basic single point positioning works is to take range measurements, so you're timing the signal, so we hear the term pseudo-range. A key issue for people like surveying and for navigation and high integrity applications is that you really can't do a check on a single point position. And so it's difficult to use in certain cases. Just to talk about range measurements, the satellites send out a binary code and the receiver generates a binary code that it thinks should be happening at that time. And by working out the offset between the two codes, you can work out the time offset and therefore you can get the range distance. And we talk about this being a pseudo-range. So during our talks this week, you'll hear about ranging and pseudo-ranges. Because you have 4 unknowns, the latitude, longitude, height, and the clock offset in your receiver, you need 4 satellites to get a position. The other term you'll hear a lot about is phase measurement, so carrier phase signals. Instead of timing the signal, more sophisticated receivers can do the measurement of the phase, the carrier phase, and that enables you to even get down to millimeter precision or resolution in the measurements. An important point about that is up until recently, most survey-grade receivers that do dual frequency had to do L2, the second frequency, in a codeless way, which made the receivers more expensive. But as we've heard, we're now starting to get L1 and L5, and with L1 and L5, you can know the code, and so you can get at the phase on both signals, and that helps a lot with high precision measurements, which I'll go into. So just on the system developments, we've heard all this about the system, so I won't talk about it too much, except that I often talk about the 3 multipliers of this. So a big one that's obvious and lots of people see is this more satellites. So we're getting many more satellites from many systems, and in this part of the world we're even getting more than more because we've also got access to the Japanese and Indian systems, and now in Australia we are also getting SBAS, for example, which John tells me does have coverage here. So that's an interesting development as well. The other development that's been hit upon is it's not just more satellites, there are better signals being broadcast. So the Galileo satellites, for example, have that improved clocks, and this is a nice diagram from GPS World article just showing the ranging accuracy of GPS, the top group, versus the ranging accuracy with Galileo. And as I mentioned in my question, there's evidence that from work Oliver Montenbroek presented at the US board a few weeks ago, that the Beidou signals are also giving very good precision and positioning, and that is perhaps put down to the cross-linking between the satellites. And the other big one, of course, is that we've got many more frequencies, and this is a nice diagram from the European GSA. And this is what I was talking about before. For dual frequency receivers at the start of my career, they were doing L1, L2 on GPS only, and then on GLONASS. But where we're heading now is being able to do L1 and L5 on multiple systems. And an important point about that is those two bands are also allocated as RNSS bands, and therefore are meant to be secure in the spectrum. They're not just picked at random as L2 sort of was, I guess. And so that means spectrum authorities should manage those spectrums and, for example, act when there is interference, etc. The other thing, of course, is L2 hasn't gone away, and there will still be the availability of those signals. And then we also have L6 coming, especially on Galileo, Beidou, and QZSS. And so we're actually getting the possibility of sort of 4 different types of measurements available to us. So just to go briefly into point positioning, we're moving from the only way to get accurate, precise positioning was to do a differential correction. So that's what we've always typically done. We've had a reference station, and we've directly corrected the ranges and sent those corrected ranges to the user. That's changing to a paradigm where we're going to be doing point positioning type approach, and you'll see I've grayed out the reference station now. I haven't removed the reference station because you still need reference stations to generate your corrections, but to the user it looks more like absolute positioning, and that has implications. So what is precise point positioning? Rather than sending corrections to ranges, precise point positioning uses corrected clocks, satellite orbits, and also tells you information about the signal biases. And if you have a dual frequency receiver, even with just that information, you can do some level of correction for the ionosphere, and you can get centimetre type positioning out of this type of approach. If you have the availability of the modelling and reference stations, you can also do corrections for the troposphere and for the ionosphere. And so based on the sophistication of your software, your communication link, etc., you can get very different results. So we're talking about phase observations, so those sort of millimetre resolution observations, and the accuracy that you get in the convergence time depends on the number of satellites you have. As I said, we have many of those. The frequencies you're using, the density of the ground stations you're using to generate those corrections and models, I should say models rather than corrections these days, and also the bandwidth you have to send data to the user. And so some work that's been going on for many years has been to augment these types of approaches using satellite-delivered systems, and there are commercial systems around, but the big development now is system-provided PPP. And so I just want to talk on that briefly. This is a couple of slides that we presented, Sulin put together, that we presented at the ICG last year, which just tries to summarise some of the issues amongst the different systems for PPP, and hopefully is useful. I should mention that India and Nigeria are also planning the possibility of PPP signals as well as the systems shown here. So things like how do you deliver it? So with Galileo, it's being proposed to deliver PPP directly from each MEO satellite. From QZSS, it's from the IGSOs and the GEOs. The IGSOs have that capability of being high in the sky at the zenith, and therefore are probably better than a GEO for delivering the corrections. So there's all sorts of little subtleties here. With Galileo and QZSS, the PPP services are talking about being on L6 and E6, which means you need that frequency in your receiver. Whereas, for example, in Australia, it's building on top of the classic dual frequency SBAS type approach, and so the corrections will be sent, or the models will be sent to you via the L5 signal, which means your hardware doesn't need L6 as well. So there's interesting parts to that. The other thing, of course, is the bandwidth. So in Australia, the SBAS is trying to squeeze what it can into the available messages, and therefore only can send sort of 250 bits, whereas QZSS has a dedicated channel and can therefore send 2,000 bits. And so, for example, it can do basically RTK positioning in Japan, where it's got very dense stations and therefore very detailed models that it can send. And then there's other things like whether it's global or regional, whether you're just doing GPS Galileo, because as I said, for Australia, it's based on the DF, the dual frequency, dual constellation type approach of next generation SBAS, whereas QZSS are proposing to augment all of the major systems, which is interesting. And again, because of the bandwidth and the availability of satellites, etc., you get different levels of solutions. So as I say, for Australia, it would be more like a float type solution, whereas for QZSS, you can actually get down to RTK type densities of models in Japan and broadcast that with the bandwidth you have. So that's a very quick overview of that. Just a quick, John can talk about this later in the week, but I thought I should mention this SBAS-based system that's being developed in Australia with 3 different levels of accuracy you can see there. And the precise point positioning, PPP, the test bed that's been running, this was some interesting work presented last year from Septentrio and GMV, just showing that if you send the PPP data through the mobile phone network over RTCM versus if you do it on the right-hand side through the SBAS messages on L5, and you can see that the performance is very comparable in terms of accuracy, although the convergence time would be longer. And there's also a bit noisier solution you get because of because you don't have that extra information. So this is the type of accuracy we're talking about. 5, 10 centimeters, 20, 30 minutes of convergence time to get to that. And that can be anywhere with these systems. The next thing I just wanted to talk about briefly is the effect of plate tectonics, and I first presented these sorts of issues at Bangalore in 2007, I think it was, at the ICG. So this is a slide I use for explaining this. If you think about GPS, you've got the monitor stations that generate the orbits, and they send the data off, and it gets uploaded back into the satellites, and that's what we call the broadcast ephemeris. If you didn't take account of the fact that Australia is moving 7 centimetres a year, you end up creating an error in the orbits. And so what GPS does with WS84 is it updates the coordinates that it uses in its tracking stations every year. So if you think about the one in South Australia, every year at the start of the year, the coordinates of the stations are used as though they're halfway through the year. So 2018, so start of 2019, we're now at 2019.5 in terms of the plate tectonics. And this happens every year and continues to happen. So in Australia, so that's how WS84 does it for GPS. And I should say this is for the broadcast orbits. The other systems have got to deal with that as well. And of course, the precise ephemeris that we use in very precise positioning is actually at the middle of a week, the current week. So this changing of the reference frame is a very important point to worry about. And so in Australia, for example, by 2020, we'll have moved 1.8 metres from our GDA 94, from 1994. And so we need to, before, because we did everything relative, it didn't matter because we just all moved with the plate. But if we're doing absolute positioning from these global systems, this becomes an issue. And that's why we're moving to what we're calling GDA 2020. And in doing that, John and his colleagues at Geoscience Australia have put together a velocity model that lets us even do what we're calling the Australian terrestrial reference frame at some epochs in the future. So you can bring a position in the future back to GDA 2020 or whatever, and you can manage this problem more properly than you currently do. So this is an important point that needs to be discussed in workshops later in the week around reference frame and cause networks, etc. And I think it's something that every country is going to have to come to grips with as we get more and more precise, whilst getting more and more absolute. So just mass market positioning, I'll talk about the fun stuff. How long do I have? okay? So many of you would be aware that back in 2017, Google enabled Android to be able to see L1 and L5 in terms of the operating system on the smartphones, and also jamming detection was enabled. Then in September 2017, Broadcom brought out this chip called the BCM 47755, and it can do L1 and L5. So it can do those two frequencies I talked about on that diagram earlier. And because it can do that, there was a lot of interest in, and I'm just going to show some slides that are actually done by Broadcom at a GSA workshop in Prague. This is just talking about the importance of the signal. A very important point that I haven't mentioned is not only is there a second frequency, but this L5 signal, the ones and zeros I had in that original slide, those codes are chipping at 10 times the rate with L5 than they are with L1, and so you have a much more precise measurement. It's like a ruler graduated to a centimetre instead of a millimetre instead of a centimetre, okay? So you've got these much more precise ranges, which helps with things like multipath as well. The availability of satellites is increasing, and this is kind of a nice slide that shows that when people talk about their GPS these days, they're only using a third of it as GPS or less. And so we're getting more and more of these satellites coming. Another thing that's interesting, and I won't read all of this, but the Broadcom hardware is also capable of tracking the full E5 signal and L2 signal. So it's actually a triple frequency chip. They just haven't enabled L2 yet, and they might enable E5 and E5B in a future release. And they've also tested that it works with RTK and PPP internally. So this was back last year, and there's obviously been more work, as Dan talked about. My overarching comment on this is the sort of detail you would see from a Trimble or a Leica about a survey-grade receiver. But now it's a chip manufacturer for a mobile phone. So that's how much things have evolved. So have we got a phone yet? Yes, we do. The Mi8, which was shown before, the Xiaomi Mi8 was the first one. And this is just a screenshot. I've got hold of one of those Mi8s. And this is a screenshot in Brisbane a couple of weeks ago. You can see it's tracking 19 unique satellites, but it's tracking on 26 channels because 7 of those channels are devoted to L5. So you can see there at the top, I've sorted this by L5, which the app can do. So there's 1 Galileo, 4 GPS and 2 QZSS that are broadcasting L5, and then the rest of the satellites, including Beidou and GLONASS, are being tracked, although Beidou and GLONASS are only single frequency. But we've got this embarrassment of extra satellites. So what does that actually mean? This is just a comparison I did on the back deck of my house. This is a Samsung single frequency, S8 is the red blob, and it's simultaneous to that, the Xiaomi Mi8 was running, which is the green blob. And the important point about that is you can see the improved grouping of the measurements, the improved precision, but there's actually only 6 L5 ranges in that solution. This app doesn't let you separate out L5, dual frequency only. You've still got the L1s, whether you like it or not. We need an app that does, you can throw away satellites. But in this app, just those 6 extra L5s have made that difference. And this is just signal point positioning straight out of the phone. So this is the sort of improvements you can get. When we've got 20, 30 dual frequency satellites, just pseudo-range alone, I think, is going to be amazing, let alone PPP. So that's where we're heading. And there's apps available to write out RINEX files so you can do things like dual frequency post-processing, which I haven't had to play with yet, but I'm getting there. So these phones are now proliferating. My Mi8 is now out of date. There's an Mi9. Oppo have released a phone that has dual frequency, and my other phone is the Huawei, which is the one on the right, and it's also dual frequency, so I've got 2 dual frequency smartphones now. This one, I believe, is a Chinese chip. I don't know whether my Chinese colleagues can confirm that or not. I don't think it's the Broadcom chip. I think it's a Chinese-developed dual frequency chip. But it can also access L5. Towards the end now, and I'll just say, this is some really interesting work that was done by Robert Odolinsky at Otago University, assisted by Peter Chernison from Curtin. And it just shows some very interesting work that was done with a Android-based phone that has a U-Blocks chip in it, although a single frequency chip. And he was showing that you can do RTK basically from this sort of chip that gets centimetre accuracy. An interesting point about this is the most limiting thing with the smartphone is now the antenna. But this phone has the ability to attach an external antenna. And so that's quite nice. And if you get the dual frequency, this is kind of our ideal phone for a surveyor type person. A dual frequency would be the next one, a dual frequency U-Blocks chip doing full phase, because you can see here that some of these low-cost chips don't do raw phase. They do sort of smoothing of the phase, and that makes RTK difficult, as Robert has said there. But if we can get dual frequency chips to which we can, in an Android type phone, to which we can attach an external receiver, that's kind of heaven. There's also these other chips like the U-Blocks. So U-Blocks have now brought out a dual frequency chip, which hopefully is going to be in the next generation of that phone I showed previously. And Dinesh is actually going to talk a lot about that, so I won't talk too much about that precise positioning. But an interesting business model type issue that's coming up is in these applications, especially intelligent transport systems, you can see that Bosch and Mitsubishi are working with Geo++, who are PPP experts, and U-Blocks, who are GPS hardware experts, to develop a service they're calling SAP Corda, to develop services that can go back into these types of applications. And there's some interesting things happening business-wise where car companies want to have a dedicated service that they can trust and I guess sue if things go wrong. And that's a very important development, I think. So my final slide. Continued GNSS system developments are going to lead to more and more capable applications. I think free and open PPP will create whole new industries where the uptake of precise positioning has been either affected by price or access. And I think that's analogous to the uptake of spatial data in open data policies and that sort of stuff. Low-cost hardware means high precision, high reliability will no longer be special. Like when you talk about GNSS, oh, there's these special precise positioning users. Well, sorry, everyone's a precise positioning user now. And that's going to be a mainstream thing. Precise positioning, both range and phase-based through low-cost hardware, will create opportunities for next generation of applications. That will lead to need for better and better orbits, clocks, etc. One point that the Broadcom slides earlier made was that they're only just starting to work out multipath given L5 and it'll only get better type discussion, okay? However, it's not all good news. We hear a lot about, and we're hearing this week, about jamming and spoofing, etc. And as we get more and more reliant, then these issues are going to be important, and that's going to be important in every country, how you address those vulnerabilities. The other thing I think out of this is that the mass market uneducated users are going to say, well, why can I get 0.3 of a metre outside and I can't get that inside? And so that's going to drive a whole new set of applications for indoor positioning, I think. And I guess the message for this conference this week is that the relevant government agencies and professionals will need to continue to evolve the supporting infrastructure, both hard infrastructure like the cores, reference stations, etc., and soft infrastructure like the data issues I mentioned, and also things like standards. And on that note, I will finish with a plug for our conference in Sydney in February, which you are all very, very welcome to attend. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I think we'll do question and answers after all the three presentations. And also we are running a little bit out of time, but it was a very nice wrap-up of the mass market, low-cost devices. Okay, so let me introduce the next speaker. So, yes. And he's going to present so that now we have Razik Noor from Australia. So he is going to present on dissemination of real-time and post-mission value-added GNSS data, global operators perspective. And let me introduce Razik. He works for Leica Geosystems, who is also the sponsor of this event, and is responsible for Hexagon SmartNet Australia, and the reference stations hardware and software in Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. He has PhD in geomatics from the University of Melbourne and BSc Honours in Civil Engineering. He has worked in GNSS research and development in Australia and in projects management overseas. Yes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the conference, and I can see people from all over the world, which is great. So today, Matt mentioned about applications. One of the great applications that proliferated mostly around the noughties, 2005-6 onwards, is the CORS infrastructure. So CORS is a continuously operating reference stations of GPS base stations. And what you get out of it is a continuous correction service that you can use to do centimeter level and sub-meter level positioning as we speak. So I'm going to talk a bit about continuously operating reference stations, and if you are operating in the global arena, what are some of the complexities? I will go through some use cases from Australia, also introduce ongoing development in Fiji and the region on course, and wrap up with some insights into the future. A bit of an outline. So history and trends, Australian use case. I'll also detail the coverage in Australia. Just to make it clear up front, Hexagon SmartNet does not own the ground-based infrastructure. They're owned by public and private organizations, 3 of which are sitting in the middle of this room, Geoscience Australia and Lands Departments and Surveyors General's departments all over Australia. The current situation in Fiji, I will try to provide some update on where the course situation is in Fiji, and then some of the issues, as I discussed, which arise because of the complexities in dissemination of the data. So Hexagon SmartNet is a real-time correction service. We provide 24/7 RTK correction in our coverage areas in an open format, so which is RTCM. Overall, globally, we have close to 5,000 reference stations. In Australia, more than 600 reference stations. Leica Geosystems have been operating in this market for about 13, 14 years now, with UK being our first SmartNet. Oh, in 2000, everyone knows the standard mode of positioning, RTK positioning was, you have a pair of GPS GNSS receivers, a base station with a radio which transmits corrections, and an RTK rover which receives the corrections and do a real-time kinematic fix. In the noughties, early noughties, this concept of continuously operating reference stations evolved, where the idea is, why do you need to operate the base stations when needed? Just operate them 24/7 and use them as required. So that was from 2001 to 2005, where we saw global and regional course networks emerging globally. SmartNet started off with SmartNet UK in 2006. SmartNet Australia started in 2009. And we continue to thrive, we continue to build and develop, and going forward, we will be in the picture as an infrastructure or corrections provider to all sorts of applications, including mass market handheld devices. Slide, I've tried to capture what the 2 different application streams that we are working with. So the top one is the traditional, where our main user base is land surveying, precision agriculture, machine control, but also GIS applications, which doesn't need that level of precision, sub-meter level, but then utility finding, ground penetrating radars, and UAVs. So all of them are consumers, individual consumers, and that part of our business, we call them a B2C type environment. But over the years, we are developing into a more B2B environment. We are working with big automotive manufacturers, agricultural manufacturers, telecoms, and the arrangement is more between two businesses and much more streamlined and which is able to grow at a much more exponential rate than a B2C situation. Our offerings are real-time correction service, post-processing correction service, post-processing, online post-processing in the B2C range, and in the B2B we provide enterprise subscription services, which is based on a large number of users out in the field. Then also providing correction service which can integrate with your solutions, with the solutions of the individual business providers. Matt talked in detail about this slide. So we are seeing devices, consumer devices, which can track multiple frequencies, multiple constellations, which brings the high precision positioning back into the hand of consumers. As Matt mentioned, the real challenge there is the antenna, which people are working around. So essentially, if you have an antenna like that connected to a dual frequency tracking mobile phone mobile phone with a dual frequency chipset, you can do centimeter level positioning. But obviously, the number of channels would need to be developed, would need to be worked on. There are so many satellites and so many frequencies. It has always been a non-ending story of chasing up how many channels can the hardware provide. The second trend that Matt also mentioned is the difference between an RTK solution and a PPP solution. Up in the course operators land, we call them a SSR type corrections, which is a state space representation of correction, to an observation state representation of corrections. We have been using the SSR corrections from day zero. All of the network processing is done in a zero baseline mode, and the correction services as they are produced are in space state representation, essentially. Then to help the existing users in the field who are very familiar with the RTK, which is an observation state representation service, we convert them to OSR and then transmit them for the rovers to use in the very familiar RTK correction service. Going forward, SSR output would be consumable as it is on devices, which is the standard PPP or PPP RTK or PPP float service. And an RTK rover would be able to use it as it is. That would provide a lot of development and a lot of opportunity, because one of the limiting factors for an OSR-based correction service is the bandwidth. If you can somehow do it in a broadcast service in a more compact form, which is SSR, it will create a lot more opportunities for use of the correction service in mass market situation. Okay. The third particular trend that is happening is using the service in automotive industries. It has been used quite frequently in the sophisticated positioning services like precision farming and machine control, but not so much in autonomous driving. And with the development of SSR technology, where you can provide the correction service to millions of users, that is a trend to look for going into the future as well. As I said, Leica Geosystem has been working with a range of automotive and agricultural providers to provide this service in a B2B type environment, including Sepcoda. The final trend that we are seeing is the reduction in base station separation. As I said, as Matt mentioned, that PPP is good, it's a single point correction service, but you still need the infrastructure around it to produce those corrections. The beauty of SSR is that you can start to expand or extend the interstation separation between the base stations. Because the bandwidth requirements are less, that when combined with the fact that the ionosphere, which is the most dynamic error source, is currently going through a low peak or trough, which means that the base station distances can be extended quite a lot by 3 to 4 times. So currently, the ideal or the maximum base station separation is around 75 kilometers between base stations, which can go up to 240 kilometers. Just to summarize the trends, we think that RTK will still be the most important high precision correction technology for the foreseeable future, at least the next 5 years. But the age of SSR is coming. With the development of low-cost consumer-based chipsets, with the provision of open signals, L1, L5, and L2C, SSR will be the most widely used in terms of the number of users in a few years. Broadcast capabilities, again, will need to be researched on, to be developed, which would be helped quite by the provision of satellite-based correction services like the Australian I.T.S service. Back to the SmartNet business, as I said, more than 4,500 base stations worldwide, coverage North America, more than 1,300 base stations, Europe, Russia, and Australia, which is a considerably smaller network when compared to the US, but based on the per capita, we are quite good. This is the current spread of reference stations in Australia, 670 plus reference stations, again, hosted by a range of providers, public and private, state and federal agencies. We combine them, we value add, we process them and value add them and provide a correction service across the continent. A bit zoom in, this is Victoria, where Leica Geosystems is based in Melbourne. Victoria has a statewide coverage. And the state public agency, DELWIP, is hosting most of the sites, and one by GA. New South Wales, again, exponential coverage happening as we speak. It is about 65 to 75% coverage area-wise. And at the moment, New South Wales government is focusing on replenishing and reinforcing the areas towards the east of the state. South Australia, coverage around the coastal areas and the peninsulas, the activity regions, the mining regions, the agricultural regions. GA is hosting about 12 stations and the rest of the stations are hosted by our partners, private partners in South Australia. Tasmania, again, a mix of providers. but quite some number of users in Tasmania, especially in the agricultural sector. And finally, the Northern Territory and Western Australia, where we have about 96 sites in total. This is the slide that I presented about a year ago. Fiji is a leader in the region in providing course infrastructure. They currently have they have hardware for about 10 stations. Among these hardware, 7 stations have been commissioned. So Latuka, Suva are hosted by South Pacific Community. These 3 sites have been donated by High Target in People's Republic of China, currently operational, and 2 of these 3 sites have been operational in Fiji as well. Going forward, to have a network capable of providing centimeter level positioning, I think we will need to have a few more stations around the current hardware infrastructure. Still not decided the business model for provision of this correction service, whether it would be public, whether it would be public-private partnership like Hexagon SmartNet, or wholly private. The data dissemination, sending out the corrections, seems like a straightforward job. You receive the corrections from the base stations and you provide them to the end users, but it is not. Some of the complexities I have tried to put on this slide, the size of the network, dealing with the number of streams that you need to replicate, evaluate, compute, and then provide corrections. The range of users, everyone has a different requirement. Sometimes the requirements are the same, but because of your business model, you want to separate them into different subsets. Then for a situation like Australia, you need to have a state-based subscription, so there are operators who are not interested. Or mainly operating in one state, they don't want to have anything to do with another state, so you need to have state-based versus a national subscription service. Then difference between real-time users and post-processing users. There have been some proliferation of users who need post-processing data lately, like the UAV users. Then depending on your hardware, the one that you are using, that you are used to, what processing methodology you want to use. You want to use a master auxiliary concept, a virtual reference station concept, or an SSR or FKP concept. Then what GNSS depend on what your capability are, GPS only, dual constellation, multiple constellation, and also the datums. Matt mentioned that we are currently doing a shift from GDA 94 to GDA 2020 and the dynamic datum into future. So if you are a user out in the field, you need to know what is available, what your requirements are, and what datum you need to use. We have currently the flexibility of look at all of these different requirements. So for example, this slide shows how we differentiate between the different market segments. So surveying use a certain port number, agriculture use another port number, and some other users use another port numbers. Then the geographical boundaries we have defined on the port numbers as well. So people in New South Wales, for example, use the 12101, Victoria 13101, and so forth. With the national licenses, if you are having a national subscription when you move across borders, you need to manually change your settings at the moment. But we are working on a solution where you will be automatically transformed to the correct settings when you cross a boundary. This is true for state and also in regions like in Europe. You very often cross the boundary from one country to another, and you would like to have a seamless transition of your settings. Then again, different formats, different correction methodologies are also dealt with as required. And finally, the datums. So we use the NTRIP identifier field to define the datum in which a certain stream is providing corrections. This is a slide that I made for a possible public-private partnership of Hexagon SmartNet for Fiji. We could divide the spectrum according to port numbers for different applications. We've talked about real-time correction service, but SmartNet is not just a real-time service. It is also a post-processing service. So we do provide post-processing data in RINEX format, RINEX 2 and RINEX 3 currently, with RINEX 2 currently on decommissioning phase, and some data completeness and multipath statistics as well, which gives you basic quality control information about the data. We also provide a post-processing service in two ways. We provide virtual RINEX files, so you can download the data and do a network processing in the post-processing mode. In addition, you can also upload the data to our website and do a positioning solution on our website. It is quite a sophisticated service. It does static and kinematic positioning and provides you with the results with the full error matrices to use in your downstream software. And again, we can support multiple datums. We can support any number of datums in a region. If you are working on a project site which uses its own custom datum, that can be supported as well. With a very simple and involved GUI online, and also an app on your phone which shows you basic information about your subscription, the status of the online connectivity. This is the real-time status for all the base stations, with the red dots being offline at the moment. And also a plot which shows you, if you have a number of rover connections, it shows you which rover connection is being used and where they are and what the status is. With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and Binaka Bakalevu.
Thank you, Rajit. So I think we move to the next one because of the time. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, so please discuss during the lunch break. And we are here, everybody. So let me find out. Could you just open your file? Do you know where you copied? Okay. So while he's opening his file, so I'd like to introduce the next speaker. So he's going to present about concepts of creating geodetic adjustment. And he's Edward Carlson from the United States Department of Commerce, National Geodetic Survey. And Mr. Carlson is the Pacific Region Geodetic Advisor, which provides training, guidance, and assistance to constituents managing geospatial activities that are tied to the United States National Spatial Reference Systems.
I don't know where they put it.
Okay. Can you help? The framework and coordinate system for all positioning activities in the United States. The geodetic advisor serves as a subject matter expert in geodesy and regional geodetic issues, collaborating across federal, state, county, city, and local users. to ensure that all geospatial activities are properly referenced to the NSRS. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here. And I would like to say from Hawaii, I live in Hawaii, I'd like to say aloha. And I'm going to talk about what you do with this data that you get, how to do a project, how to do an adjustment. And I'll try to be quick because I know we're running late for lunch. So let me start. So what I'm going to talk about is the GPS project guidelines, what we came up with. This guidelines we developed for people who to use that don't want to, just want to have an adjustment. They want to have 1 centimeter accuracy horizontal and 2 to 3 centimeters vertically. We did this because there are a lot of users in the U.S., like the floodplain mappers that want to know elevations, the water well people want to know their elevations, and of course surveyors want to know their elevations, but they don't want to have to run long distance leveling so they could get an accurate elevation to do their work. So what I'm going to talk about is the layout, observations, data processing, analysis of the baseline, and adjustments that we do. One of the big guidelines for this whole thing is that you must repeat your baseline observations, and they must be done at different times, different days. And the reason why we say this is we want to use different satellite geometry. We get a lot of users came in and said, well, I repeated my baseline, but I observed from 8 o'clock in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Next day I came in and I observed from 8 o'clock in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. So I have a redundant baseline. I said, no, you really don't, because you really have the same satellite geometry at that time. You want to get it where you have different ones so you can get better vector results. You'll see this later on. So it helps detect and reduce the effect of the multipathing. So I'm going to talk about a project area that we did in San Francisco, and this was a test case that we did. We knew all these points that I'm in the project, we know the elevations for, and we know the horizontal coordinates. So we wanted to see, after we came up with our guidelines of how to do this, if we were meeting our guidelines. So this is the area we had. We knew we had 5 L1, L2 receivers, and we wanted to get 1 centimeter accuracy horizontal and 2 to 3 vertically. So what we did is, of course, we went out and reconned all the positions that we wanted to use, and we wanted to find the most accurate to hold the control stations to. And we wanted to we used ones that were already in what we call the National Geodetic Database, which are points that we've already established, and we know the coordinates, and they've been well determined, and they followed a certain standard. We know that we have course sites that we use, and we also have benchmarks that we know that people have leveled to, and we have them in our database, and we know that they followed certain standards to get the elevation accuracy. And we wanted to identify all the stations that were GPS-able. A lot of people say, oh, I got a GPS receiver, I can go out and GPS anything, but they'll go underneath a tree and do their observations. They found out that they can't get signal or something's going haywire. So these are all the stations that we came up with that we wanted to use. We said that some were going to be new, some were going to be old, and some of the benchmarks. So we had to come up with the observing schedule, and part of this process is that I just started off with these first 5 stations to work around. The reason why we did this is that the way the roads are in this area, we wanted to keep flowing so we didn't have to do a long distance driving. We want to try to make it simple for all the people doing the project. So we just picked the first 5 stations. And the next session we have is, you notice that we have an overlap of 2 stations, and then we just kept going around. We wanted to make sure that we had an overlap of 2 stations to continue the continuity of the network when you figure out the vectors that you want to process. So after that, we determined these are the vectors that we want to process after we did all our observations. We went out in the field, we did our observations, and you can see that on these marks, I should have said that some of them are cores, some of them are benchmarks, and some of them we called new stations, because the benchmarks are going to play an important role in this later on when we do the adjustment. So we went out and did our observations, and you can see here that in the first day we had the session that started at 8 o'clock and went to 8:45 in session A, but then the second time we observed it was on the second day, and we started at 1 o'clock to 1:45. So we got that 4-hour separation the best we can. And then, of course, if you look at E, the same thing. We did the 4-hour separation. It's, sometimes you can't get the 4-hour separation, but you try to do the best you can because you're working in real world with the surveyors. So we have to have the receivers, and the requirements are the receivers had to be dual frequency, like I said before. They had to be calibrated with our GPS modeling, and it's the IGS antenna calibration, and we calibrate some for the IGS. The IGS does them. We have all this data of all the calibrated ones, and we prefer that they have a ground plane. A choke ring would have been the best, but if we can get it with a ground plane, and fixed height tripods are preferred. It is critical in this to determine the elevation that we want to use a tripod that you can measure the height to, the HI to the bottom of the antenna, or what they call the antenna reference point. And when we record the measurements, we like to record them to 1/10 of a millimeter and 100th of a, or 1,000th of a foot. I do 100th of a foot and a millimeter. And the reason why we record them in both is that if you make a mistake, you can convert, and you can see if they're measured right. Because some people can say, oh, this is what it is in meters, but then if they do it in feet, they can't convert. And we use a U.S. standard survey foot for the conversion. And you need to know the height, like I said, above the antenna reference point. So it is critical. We give people this diagram of how to measure it. We want to measure from what we're trying to measure to is we're trying to measure to the ARP, and we want to know that height. But sometimes you don't have that luxury because you're using a tripod, so you use a slant height, and then with the manufacturer's numbers that they have on the receiver saying what the difference is between the antenna plane and where you measure to the bottom of the ARP, then you can do the compute up the true elevation to the ARP from the slant height. So this is the biggest important thing that we say for people when they're out in the field, observation logs. I work with a lot of people, and they really don't write down all the information. And you have to remember that when you're out in the field, I always tell the surveyor, you might not be the one processing the data, somebody else might be in the office. And if you don't write down the right information, they might get it wrong and your whole project could be out the window. So we record the station, the observation information, the receiver and antenna model number. That's very important because we need to know that for when you're doing the post-processing, that you tie it to the correct receiver to get the offsets that they had for the modeling. The start and stop times, of course, and record the height of the antenna and unusual conditions. You might have where a storm came through while you're doing your observations, so you might want to record that because that will influence the post-processing because your barometric pressure changes and that can change the vector processing. And of course, before we used to say station rubbings and drawings, but now since with digital camera and the camera with on the phone, we say take a close-up picture of the mark and a horizontal view so you know where it is. So when you get all that done, you download the data, you get it in Rhinex format that they were talked about before, and now we're going to do the vector processing. You do the vector processing with the vendor software, whatever company you have, or we have our own software that we use in-house to process our vectors. We call it pages. So we determine that we want to use 15 degrees elevation mask. We observe it to 10. We process it to 15, start processing 15 because we know that there's, at the lower end of the elevation mask, there's a troposphere bias, so we want to eliminate that. We want it right. We want to use a precise ephemeris. We want to use the most precise ephemeris you have. If it's a rapid static or an ultra rapid static one, that's fine if you do, because all these lines are short baselines. But we really prefer precise, which usually comes out about, the precise ephemeris comes out about 10 to 12 days after you do your observations. You want to correct the ionosphere for all baselines greater than 5 kilometers, so you want to fix the integers for kilometers less than, for baselines less than 5 kilometers, you only have to fix the L1. If baseline is greater than 5 kilometers, you want to do what we call the ionosphere or L3 solution. So with that, you want to look at it the data to see if the solutions have low RMS, the repeatability of the measurements, analyze the loop closures that you can with your data, but now more with the new adjustment software that's out there, better it's been getting. We've kind of gone away from the loop closure because you can force errors with loop closures because you just make your distance longer so your error will look better when you have an error. And you want to be aware of the loop, like I said, loop closures cannot disclose all the problems. So this is what we came up with our repeat baselines after I processed it all for the sessions. And now I'm looking at the vectors. I'm looking at the vectors and I can see that I have a problem. At this session I have that the RMS is not below 2 or 2.5. You have a problem with the vectors, so you're going to have to reprocess them. You have the same thing with this. You have it at 32, so you're going to have to reprocess these to see if you can get those numbers down, or then if you can't, then you're going to have to go out and reobserve them. So after that, I reprocessed. I came up with this solution. And what I noticed is that really, if you look at the second one, 77G and 76G, the difference is really 1/10 or 4/10 of a centimeter. So in actuality, the first observation should be rejected. So then if I keep these other two, I'll be within my tolerance of what I want for the rejected observation, repeat observations. So with that, now I'm going to take it in and do the adjustment. With this, we have our adjustment guidelines. Of course, we do a least squares adjustment. We have our own program, what we call Adjust, that does a least squares adjustment. It's free to it's an open source software, can be used anytime by anybody. Well, you can use the vendor software, but you have to follow these guidelines that we have. And of course, the first thing is that the adjustment minimizes the effect of random errors. You'll have random errors in the job, and you want to make sure you take care of it. At least they'll compute a single network solution, even though you have redundant vectors, and they will highlight, the adjustment will highlight blunders and errors. I could have had repeat vectors that are correct, but they could have been to the wrong mark. The person could have gone to the wrong mark twice. And it will provide an estimate on position and coordinates for the station. So with that, what we'll do is we'll do a horizontal adjustment. We'll only hold latitude, longitude, and ellipsoidal height fixed. We'll get of one station. This will help remove all the blunders and all the large residuals and determine which control points that you have that you knew there were old control points that you had that you want to hold fixed that should be fixed, because you couldn't have them where there could be an error or there could be a movement, the mark could have moved and all this. So what I do is I do a diagram and I plot it out to see what happens with the marks. Then you do a constrained adjustment of all the suitable stations that you want to fix, latitude, longitude, and ellipsoidal height, and make sure the constraints do not, after you do that adjustment, go back and I plot I have a program that will take the difference between two adjustments, and I can look at what the difference is in latitude, longitude, and ellipsoidal height to see that I haven't distorted the network by holding a station fix, improper station fix. And note, this is not done with a geoid model at this time. We're not using a geoid model in the horizontal adjustment. So with this, I held the first station fixed. I held the core site fixed. And these are the points I determined the horizontal ones I could hold fixed in the project. So I held them fixed. I got the latitude, longitude, and ellipsoidal height of a constrained adjustment. And remember, this is not holding any orthometric heights fixed at the time. So I have an adjustment with latitude, longitude, and ellipsoidal height. So now we go back and do a vertical adjustment. But first thing we do is we apply the geoid model, the latest geoid model you have, whatever it is, EGM08 or one that you have in this area, or one that we have for the US, we have different geoid models. So we apply it. We do a minimally constrained adjustment. This time we hold the latitude, longitude, and orthometric height of one station. We remove all the blunders and large residuals. Well, there shouldn't be any because you've already done that through the horizontal. If there are, then you have a problem. You have to go back and really analyze the job. Compare the heights from the adjustment free adjustment to what you want to hold constrained, and determine the benchmarks that are best to be fixed. Do a constrained adjustment, and you hold all the latitude and longitude at one station, and then you just fix all the orthometric heights at the suitable station, and make sure that, again, the constraints don't distort the project. And with that, at this project, I held that one benchmark fixed, and I held these other benchmarks, and I came up with my adjustment. And after that, with the final product, what you'll get is you'll have a adjustment with the horizontal latitude, longitude, ellipsoidal height, and one with the vertical. And then you can use XL or whatever to put them together, so you'll end up with coordinates that will have latitude, longitude, ellipsoidal height, and orthometric height. And the reason why we do this in two different adjustments, people say, well, why do you do it in two different adjustments? Well, we know that the geoid models, some of them are not accurate. So if you're holding the geoid height fixed, or an orthometric height, ellipsoidal height with the geoid height fixed, you could be putting error into your orthometric height. And we can see that through the modeling, especially when you're using some of these worldwide models like EGM08, and I'll talk about it in my next talk later this week, about how much area you can put in. You can put up to 70 to 80 centimeters. We know in Hawaii the geoid model is not that accurate because we haven't done any gravity work in years out there. So that's the reason why we do it in two different modes. And with that, summary is, mistakes and systematic errors must be removed. Least squares adjustment handles random errors and provides a single solution. Minimally constrained adjustment checks the internal consistency of the network. Constrained adjustment checks the reference network to the datum. And the vertical adjustment estimates GPS-derived orthometric heights. And with that, I'm finished. Thank you. Any questions?
Did I go too fast? That's right. Thanks. Thanks. Very nice talk. And I think we need this type of some sort of survey manual, how to do survey for many users. Yep. Okay, so this is all the session. End of the session, this session, I think, yes, there are some, information from the organizers, yes?
Please join me in appreciating the very good presentations and then a very good job done by the chairpersons and then rapporteurs. Thank you. We will now break for the lunch. And if you look at the end of your program, the map, we are at venue number 1. From here, we will go to venue number 4. This is where we will have our lunch. And very near to this venue number 4, there is venue number 2. This is where we will have our rest of the workshop and other sessions. So we will have our colleagues who will guide you to venue number 4 from here. Thank you. Please enjoy your very traditional Pacific lunch. Thank you.
Thank you. So we don't come back here anymore.
No. Okay. As you can see in your program, the venue from now onwards will be N111, which is very near to where we will be having our lunch. Thank you.
No, I think it's okay. I do have a manual that I can. Yes. Because you bring me, I can give it to you. Please. Guidelines on how to do it.
Because now, you see, I'm from Nepal.
Right.
Nepal Survey Department recently measured the height of the Everest survey.
Right, I read that, yeah.
And so maybe, we need to discuss how to do good GPS survey.
Well, when you have a geoid,
measure.
if you have a geoid model, then a good geoid model, then it'll work. But the reason why we do it is that when we did our
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, before you leave, we were running a little bit late behind schedule today, so we will resume session in the N111 Lecture Theatre at 2:30 this afternoon. There are signs to the venue. If you can also, outside, you can follow that or use the map. But we'll resume in the N111 Lecture Theatre at 2:30 today. Thank you. You can. And then you got on the flight from. He came over at 8:30 to here. Yeah, we're all on the plane. Because the guys from Angle, I think they're. The other one. No, the other one is for the. So I'll meet you there. Yeah. Okay. We'll have an intern that will help you with that. Hi, Noor? Yes. I'm Billy. Nice to finally meet you. Thank you so much for visiting me.
Do I have to delete this?
No. Shafa, you want this on...
Yeah, so I want everything what was presented today.
Mm-hmm.
They have the folder which says 24-28 June.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can...
So this one...
So he doesn't want to copy?
No, it's already copied.
Oh, okay. If someone doesn't want that.
So we put...
So if you, in my folder there, so we need IT person or someone sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
You see the delayed because someone doesn't know which button, where we got delayed because of that.
Okay.
There should be someone from you.
Yes,
Someone,
we
if
have...
the presenter is confused, you just run into him, press the button, and
Done.
this is
Sure.
That's the way it works. Otherwise, we will delay everything. I understand. It's off my computer, so I don't know which one.
So you send in your flash to...
Yeah, if there is 24, 28. Okay, anyway, then you can put here. You can put it, yeah, it's right here. And if you can create folder PPT. Yeah, PPT. And then copy everything what you have to do over there, and then